You don't need me to tell you that this is as close to perfect as a point-and-shoot camera gets, especially at its price, well, assuming you can get it at its retail price or anywhere close to that. But even as an experienced photographer, there is a learning curve, and I wanted to run you through the 6 things that I learned as a new Fujifilm shooter, especially coming from using primarily Sony cameras the last few years. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm Chris Hagan, a video producer and photographer, and we're going to dive right in to those 6 things today. All I ask is keep supporting the channel, and if this helps you at all, hit that like and subscribe button below. Starting with number 1, that would be you make the photos, not the film recipes. That's a big one because with all of these film stock recipes and different color recipes floating around out there that you may or may not tweak a little bit, there are bound to be other photographers shooting with similar colors, maybe even in similar locations. But your style, your angles, your eye, your presentation, it's all unique to you. Number 2 is, if you're going to stick with JPEGs, nailing your exposure is key. I've heard experienced photographers say how comfortable they are sharing JPEGs because depending on where the photos are headed, you may or may not need to shoot RAW or do much post-production if you've gotten it right in camera. That's a big if. The thing about some of these film simulation recipes is how different exposure can really change the results when you're not able to push and pull the highlights and shadows as easily after the fact. Seems like a no-brainer, but as someone that's been editing the RAWs before sharing for years, it's a reminder to me to think just a second or two longer before pressing the shutter button. This also ties into the last point that I'll make near the end of the video, so be sure to stick around. The third thing I've learned is to slow down more, and that's a good thing. This is a camera that can track well enough and snap off, 11 frames per second or something like that if you want it to. But I've been limiting myself to one still at a time, one shutter press at a time. If I'm trying to eliminate the amount of time it takes for me to go from capturing to sharing, I don't want to spend too long sorting through a ton of images because I was shooting at a high burst rate. Less is more in this situation. Number 4 is kind of a combination of points 2 and 3, which is to shoot film stock simulations like you would with real film. What's great about this being a modern digital camera is we can load 7 types of film simulations into the settings and cycle through them pretty quickly. The thing is, and maybe this is just personal to me, but I don't want to see one scene in a bunch of wildly different ways. If it's a coffee date, a walk around the neighborhood, or any one particular scene, I'd like to keep it cohesive. You wouldn't take a film camera out and change out the film stock every 2 or 3 photos. I try to find one simulation that works for the particular scene and roll with it and just stop overthinking everything. Number 5 is another pretty big one, and it's autofocus and adjusting to how it works. It's my first time using a camera for photos that hasn't been the A7 IV or A7S III. If you know those cameras, you know how lightning quick and sticky the autofocus is. What I'd say about the X100VI is that it can certainly be sticky. I've had no problem catching someone's eye with a half shutter press and staying on it while I move the camera or they move within the frame. But it's the locking on process that can sometimes take just a little bit more time, especially for objects or buildings. For example, I think subject detection and face and eye detection works really well. But it's when I have that turned off and I'm trying to quickly focus on an object that I may need to slow down sometimes. Even when shooting with a wide autofocus area on my A7 IV, I feel like more times than not, it just knows where I want to focus. And if it doesn't then, it certainly will once I make the focus area a little bit smaller. But with the X100VI, even with a small focus point, it will hunt a little bit. It's nothing that caused me to miss too many shots or really even complain about hardcore. It's just not quite as fast as shooting Sony or Canon or maybe even some of the newer Nikon cameras. Finally, number 6 is, even with a camera like the X100VI that can produce stellar JPEGs straight out of camera, you should probably shoot RAW alongside those JPEGs. That's something that I came up with after taking a few family shots in less than ideal lighting. If you're going to be shooting with film stock simulations with some unique colors and heavier grain and things that can get a little wonky, capturing a raw version of the image is something you may want to have access to later if the photo didn't come out how you liked as a JPEG. That way, if you still want to give it a little bit of a film feel later, but also smoothing out the white balance, or fix your tone curve or change some grain settings, really anything, you can do so. And then if you want to make it a clean, more digital looking photo, then you can do that too with all the 40 megapixels of greatness. Also, and this is a tip that I got from Eddie Maynard's channel, whose video I'll link below, if you're shooting RAW plus JPEG, you can edit your JPEGs in camera, which is super cool for quickly fixing exposure and not having to touch it once you send the photo to your phone or computer. It takes seconds on the camera, and it's probably one of my favorite features of the X100VI right now. His video, I think it's about 5 minutes, is definitely worth a look to learn how to take advantage of it. Anyway, that's all I've got right now as far as first impressions, other than the obvious that you've probably heard before that. It's just a really fun camera to shoot with, and I feel like every day I need to get out there and take advantage of that. Whether you're going to be taking your images straight out of camera or editing the RAWs, the capability of this body and this lens in such a small form factor is nothing short of a modern marvel and a welcome change, especially after carrying around more bulky gear that you use with full-frame cameras. If you're a longtime Fujifilm shooter, I'd love to know what other tips you can share that you've learned over the years. And if you're a newer Fujifilm shooter like me, what have your first impressions been? Let's get the discussion going in the comments and keep it going in the future videos to come. See ya!